The October wind carried dust and memories across the Arizona territory as Clara Hallowell guided her mare through the narrow mountain pass. The letter in her saddlebag had been brief. A rancher near Mogollon Rim needed a nurse for an injured cowboy. The pay was generous, triple her usual rate, which should have warned her something was amiss. But Clara had learned not to question good fortune when it came knocking in 1882. Cedar Falls disappeared behind her as she climbed higher into the rugged terrain. These lands bore scars from a decade of Apache wars. Burnt homesteads dotted the landscape like broken teeth, and every shadow could hide danger. Clara kept her Winchester within reach. A habit formed during her years tending wounded soldiers at Fort Apache. Those days had hardened her to blood and suffering, but they'd also stolen her husband, leaving her with medical skills and an empty bed. The trail wound through juniper and pine, climbing steadily toward the rim country. By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered overhead, matching the unease in Clara's stomach. The directions led her off the main trail onto a barely visible path, marked only by a weathered cross. Another hour of riding brought her to a valley hidden between two ridges, and there it stood. The loneliest ranch she'd ever seen. The main house squatted low against the earth, built from logs and stone, designed more for defense than comfort. No smoke rose from the chimney. No dogs barked. No hands worked the corrals. Just silence, thick as molasses, broken only by the creak of a windmill. Clara dismounted slowly, leading her mare toward the hitching post. The door opened before she could knock, revealing a Mexican woman whose face bore the deep lines of someone who'd seen too much. "Senora Hallowell?" The woman's voice was barely above a whisper. "I am Rosa. Thank you for coming. Where's my patient?" Clara asked, hefting her medical bag. Rosa's eyes darted nervously. "This way. Please, he is difficult." The interior was spartanly furnished. Rough-hewn furniture, no photographs, no feminine touches. Rosa led her down a hallway to a door reinforced with iron brackets. She knocked softly. "Senor Quinn, the nurse has arrived." A growl came from within, more animal than human. Rosa fumbled with a key, hands trembling. "He does not like visitors. Be careful. Senora." The door swung open to reveal a scene from Clara's battlefield nightmares. Blood-soaked bandages littered the floor. The smell of infection hung heavy, and on the bed, propped against the wall with a Colt revolver in his hand, sat a man who looked more beast than human. Sawyer Quinn was massive, over 6 feet of corded muscle and barely contained violence. His hair hung to his shoulders, black as coal and matted with dried blood. A week's worth of beard covered a face that might have been handsome before pain carved deep grooves around his eyes and mouth. But it was those eyes that made Clara's breath catch, pale gray, like winter sky, holding depths of suffering she recognized too well. "Get out." His voice was gravel over broken glass. Clara had faced dying soldiers, delirious patients, and grieving widows. She didn't flinch now. "Put the gun down. Mr. Quinn, I'm here to help." "Don't need help." He shifted, and she saw the blood stain spreading across his left side, the fevered flush on his skin. "Tell Rosa to leave supplies. I'll manage." "You'll die." Clara set down her bag, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "That wound's infected. Another day, maybe 2, and no amount of frontier stubbornness will save you." Something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise. Maybe. That she didn't cower. The gun wavered. "I've been dying for years. Woman, what's a few more days?" Clara took a step closer, close enough to see the sheen of sweat on his brow, the tremor in his gun hand. "Because I took an oath to preserve life, Mr. Quinn, even yours. Now, you can shoot me and explain to Rosa why there's a dead woman in your bedroom, or you can let me do my job." For a long moment, they stared at each other, predator and healer, locked in silent battle. Then, with a curse that would have made a sailor blush, Sawyer lowered the gun. "Fine, but you do your work and leave. No questions, no conversation." Clara nodded, already cataloging what she'd need. As she moved closer to examine the wound, She caught sight of his back and nearly gasped. Scars crisscrossed his skin like a terrible map, some from bullets, others from knives, but many bore patterns she didn't recognize. Ritual marks, torture signs, stories written in flesh that spoke of horrors beyond her battlefield experience. The fresh wound was bad, a knife slash across his ribs, already angry with infection. But as she cut away his shirt, Clara discovered more. Old bullet wounds, poorly healed, marks around his wrists from shackles. And strangest of all, scarification on his chest in patterns that seemed almost ceremonial. She worked in silence, cleaning and stitching, aware of his eyes tracking her every movement. When she reached for the laudanum, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "No, no drugs. It'll help with the pain. No!" The word was final, weighted with some meaning she couldn't grasp. Clara finished her work without anesthetic, impressed despite herself that he never made a sound. When she finally stepped back, exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. The sun had set, and Rosa appeared with a lamp and basin of fresh water. "The Senora will stay?" Rosa asked hopefully. "Few days," Clara replied, ignoring Sawyer's glare. "Until the fever breaks." I said, "You said no questions and no conversation." Clara interrupted. "You said nothing about me leaving before my job's done. Unless you plan to shoot me after all." Sawyer's jaw worked like he was chewing nails, but he remained silent. Rosa showed Clara to a small room across the hall, barely larger than a closet, but clean. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the wind howl through the canyon and Sawyer's fevered murmurs through the walls. He spoke in languages she didn't recognize, English mixed with Spanish and something else, something that made the hair on her neck stand up. Apache, she realized with a chill. The man was speaking Apache in his delirium. She rose twice to check on him, finding him thrashing in sweat-soaked sheets, lost in nightmares that had him calling out warnings and what sounded like names. Each time, she cooled his fever and changed his bandages, working by lamplight while he remained caught in whatever demons haunted his sleep. By dawn, the fever had broken, and Clara found herself studying her patient in the pale morning light. Beneath the grime and blood, she could see he wasn't much older than her own 30 years, but his body told stories of a lifetime of violence. Every scar had a tale, every mark a memory etched in flesh. She was replacing his bandages when his eyes snapped open, instantly alert and wary. "You stayed. I told you I would." He watched her work, tension radiating from every muscle. When her fingers brushed one of the ritual scars, he flinched as if burned. "Don't," he growled. Clara withdrew her hand but couldn't stop the question. "Who did this to you?" His laugh was bitter as desert alkali. "Which scars?" "Mrs. Hallowell. I've collected them from various sources. You know my name. Rosa talks." He struggled to sit up, waving away her assistance. "Speaking of which, you should go. I'll pay triple your rate for one night's work. The wound needs, it'll heal or it won't. Either way, it's not your concern." Clara packed her supplies with deliberate slowness, her mind racing. Everything about this man screamed danger, from the defensive ranch to the arsenal of weapons she'd glimpsed under his bed, from his fluency in Apache to the way he moved like a caged wolf even while injured. But there was something else, too, a loneliness so profound it seemed to seep from the very walls. "I'll need to check the wound in 2 days," she said finally. "Infection could still set in." "Don't bother. It's my professional reputation at stake. Mr. Quinn, I don't leave jobs half-finished." She left before he could argue further, but not before catching a glimpse of something unexpected in those storm-gray eyes, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Not of her, she realized, but of what she represented. Human connection, compassion, things a man living like a ghost might have forgotten existed. The ride back to Cedar Falls passed in a blur of questions. Who was Sawyer Quinn? What had driven him to live like a hermit in hostile territory? And why did her healing touch seem to cause him more pain than his wounds? Clara knew she should take his money and forget the strange encounter. But as she reached the outskirts of town, She found herself already planning her return journey. Some mysteries demanded solving. Some wounds went deeper than flesh. And some patience. She was beginning to understand. Needed more than medicine to heal. 2 days later, Clara returned to the hidden ranch despite every rational thought telling her to stay away. She found Sawyer attempting to mend a fence, his movements stiff with pain, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "You're a fool," she called out, dismounting near the corral. He didn't turn. "Thought I made myself clear about visitors, and I made myself clear about checking that wound." Clara marched over, noting how he gripped the fence post for support. Inside, now. The fence needs a healthy man to fix it properly, not a stubborn one about to collapse from blood loss. To her surprise, he complied, though his glare could have scorched leather. In the house, Rosa greeted Clara with obvious relief, bustling to prepare hot water and clean bandages. The wound looked better than Clara expected, but Sawyer's fever had returned. As she worked, she noticed him watching her with an intensity that made her fingers tremble slightly. "Why'd you come back?" he asked suddenly. "I told you, professional responsibility." Bull. The crude word should have offended her, but something in his tone made it almost gentle. Nobody rides 2 hours through Apache country for professional responsibility. Clara concentrated on rewrapping the bandage. "Maybe I'm just foolish. Maybe." He was quiet for a moment. "Or maybe you're running from something too." Her hand stilled. How had he seen what others missed? The empty house in Cedar Falls. The letters from her sister begging her to remarry. The nights she woke reaching for a husband 2 years in the ground. We all have our reasons for choosing solitude. Mr. Quinn. Something shifted in his expression. A recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit. When she finished, he caught her wrist gently this time. "Stay for coffee. Rosa makes it strong enough to float a horseshoe." It was the closest thing to an invitation she suspected he'd offered anyone in years. Over the following weeks, Clara found herself returning every few days. The wound healed, but there always seemed to be another reason to visit. Rosa needed help with preserving food. The medical supplies needed organizing. Sawyer had wrenched his shoulder working with a difficult horse. Gradually, the hostile silence between them eased into something resembling companionship. Clara discovered that beneath the dangerous exterior, Sawyer possessed a sharp intelligence and dry wit. He knew the mountains like the back of his scarred hands, could track like an Apache, and had read more books than most educated men she'd known. It was during her 5th visit that Clara made her discovery. She'd been looking for laudanum in the storage room when she noticed a locked door she'd previously overlooked. Curiosity overcoming propriety. She tried the handle, locked, but as she turned away, her skirts caught on a loose floorboard, revealing a key hidden beneath. The room beyond took her breath away. Apache artifacts covered every surface. Beautifully woven baskets, ceremonial masks, weapons decorated with beads and feathers. But it was the personal items that made her heart race. A woman's doeskin dress, elaborately beaded, a pair of moccasins, too small for Sawyer's feet. And photographs, not of Apache life, but carefully preserved tin types showing Sawyer younger, cleaner shaven, standing beside cavalry officers. "Find what you're looking for." Clara spun, finding Sawyer filling the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did." He entered the room, movements careful as if walking through a shrine. "Been wondering when your curiosity would get the better of you." He picked up an arrow, running his fingers along the fletching. "Chiricahua Apache, some of the finest warriors who ever lived. They found me when I was 15, more dead than alive after my family's wagon train was attacked by bandits. Should have killed me. Instead," he set the arrow down gently. "Instead, they took me in." Clara remained silent, sensing the weight of secrets about to be revealed. Lived with them 8 years, learned their ways, their language, their medicine. Married, his voice caught. He touched the doe-skin dress reverently. Her name was Nalin. It means maiden. She was the medicine woman's daughter. What happened? What always happens. The army happened. The wars intensified. I was caught between two worlds, trusted by neither. When I refused to participate in a raid against a settlement, I was cast out. When I tried to warn the cavalry about an ambush, they arrested me as a spy. His laugh was bitter. The ghost of Rio Verde, they called me, the white man who'd gone native, who could appear and disappear like smoke. Clara moved closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. The woman in the dress, killed in a cavalry raid 2 months after I was exiled. I wasn't there to protect her. His hands clenched into fists. Wasn't there to protect any of them. The pieces fell into place. The defensive ranch, the isolation, the weapons. He was still fighting a war. Only now it was with himself. Is that why you live here? Punishment? Partially. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. And partially because I don't fit anywhere else. Too Apache for the whites. Too white for the Apache. A ghost between worlds. That night, Clara stayed later than usual. They sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of fire. Sawyer had brought out a bottle of whiskey, and they passed it between them, the burn warming Clara's chest. "Your husband," Sawyer said eventually. "How'd he die?" Clara had expected the question eventually. "Fever, after the battle at Sibicu Creek. I worked on him for 3 days, used every skill I had." She took another sip. Sometimes skill isn't enough. Sometimes nothing's enough. He was quiet for a moment. "You blame yourself. Every day. Don't." The word was firm. "Death comes when it will. The Apache taught me that. We can fight it, delay it sometimes. But ultimately," he shrugged, "ultimately, we're all just borrowing time." Is that supposed to be comforting? No, just true. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The night sounds of the desert rose around them, a symphony Clara was learning to appreciate. "I should go," she said finally. "It's getting late. Stay." The word escaped before he could stop it. Judging by his immediate tension. "I mean, the trail's dangerous at night. Rosa can make up a proper room." Clara knew she should refuse, knew the impropriety of it, the questions it would raise if anyone found out. But looking at this man who'd opened his scars to her, literal and figurative, she found herself nodding. That night, she woke to the sound of screaming. Racing across the hall, she found Sawyer thrashing in his bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare. Apache words mixed with English, pleas and warnings and names of the dead. Without thinking, Clara sat on the bed's edge, placing a cool hand on his burning forehead. "Shh," she whispered. "You're safe. You're home." His eyes snapped open, wild and unseeing. For a moment, she thought he might strike her. Then recognition dawned, and something else, a vulnerability that took her breath away. "Clara?" Her name on his lips was a question, a prayer. "I'm here." His hand found hers, gripping like a drowning man. She let him pull her closer, until she was sitting properly on the bed, his head nearly in her lap. He was trembling, this strong, dangerous man, shaking like a child. "Tell me about them," she said softly. "Tell me their names." And he did. In the darkness, with her fingers gentle in his hair. Sawyer spoke of the family who'd taken him in, of the grandfather who'd taught him to track, the grandmother who'd shown him which plants healed and which harmed, of friends lost to bullets and disease, of a culture being systematically destroyed, of a love that transcended race and tradition only to be murdered by hate. By dawn, his voice was hoarse, and Clara's legs were numb from sitting. But something had shifted between them. The last wall had fallen. As sunlight crept through the windows, Sawyer sat up, his expression uncertain. "I've never told anyone that, any of it. I'm honored you trusted me." He studied her face, one scarred hand rising to touch her cheek. "You're not afraid of me." "Should I be?" Most would say yes. Clara covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. I'm not most people. No, he agreed softly. You're not. Rosa found them that way an hour later, sitting close, hands intertwined, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. If the older woman was shocked, she hid it well, simply bringing coffee and fresh tortillas before disappearing with a knowing smile. Clara knew she should be embarrassed, should pull away and reestablish proper boundaries. Instead, she found herself leaning into Sawyer's warmth, feeling more at peace than she had since her husband's death. The ghost between worlds had found someone who could see past the shadows, and the healer who'd thought herself beyond healing was discovering that some wounds could only be mended by another's touch. But even as hope bloomed fragile in her chest, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their past was far from finished with them. Secrets that deep, pain that profound. They had a way of returning when least expected. For now, though, she let herself rest in this moment of grace, two damaged souls finding solace in their shared brokenness. The smell of sage and rabbit stew filled the kitchen as Clara stirred the pot, a recipe she'd learned from her late husband during their early days at Fort Apache. She'd been staying at the ranch more frequently, telling herself it was to help Rosa with the growing medical needs of the scattered homesteaders. But the truth sat heavy in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. Smells familiar, Sawyer said from the doorway, his approach so quiet she hadn't heard him enter. Just something I picked up years ago, Clara replied, keeping her voice steady despite the way her pulse quickened at his presence. He moved closer, peering into the pot. My grandmother, my Apache grandmother, made something similar, called it ga, used juniper berries instead of sage, though Clara found herself smiling. Would you like me to try it that way next time? Next time, he repeated softly, as if tasting the promise of future moments. I'd like that. These small domesticities had become their dance, careful steps around the growing attraction neither quite acknowledged. Clara had taken to bringing books from town, and they spent evenings by the fire, her reading aloud while he worked leather or cleaned his guns. The comfortable silence broken only by the crack of burning wood and the turn of pages. It was during one such evening that Sawyer surprised her. I want to show you something, he said suddenly, setting aside the bridle he'd been mending. Clara marked her place in Wuthering Heights and followed him outside. The moon hung full and bright, casting silver light across the desert landscape. He led her to the barn, where his horses stood in their stalls, and stopped before a magnificent paint stallion. This is Sai. It means canyon in Apache. He ran his hand along the horse's neck with obvious affection. Raised him from a colt. He's one of the few things I kept from before. He's beautiful. Clara breathed, extending her hand slowly. The stallion sniffed her fingers before allowing her touch. The Apache believe horses choose their riders, not the other way around. Sawyer watched her interact with the animal, something soft in his expression. He's particular about people, doesn't usually take to strangers. Maybe I'm not a stranger anymore. Their eyes met across the stallion's back, and the air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities. Sawyer cleared his throat, stepping back. There's a place I want to show you. Will you ride with me? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. He saddled Sei and a gentle mare, helping her mount with hands that lingered a moment longer than necessary at her waist. They rode in companionable silence, the desert alive with the night sounds, owl calls, the rustle of small creatures, the distant yip of coyotes. After an hour's ride, they climbed a narrow trail that opened onto a hidden canyon. A spring bubbled from the rocks, feeding a small pool surrounded by cottonwoods. In the moonlight, it looked like something from a fairy tale. This was a sacred place, Sawyer said, dismounting. The Apache came here for purification ceremonies, for healing. It's where I came after. He stopped, jaw tightening. After I lost everything. He helped Clara down, his hands warm and steady on her waist. This time, he didn't immediately step away. and she found herself standing close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. "Why did you bring me here?" she whispered. "Because you're the first person in 5 years who's made me want to remember instead of forget." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones with reverent gentleness. "Because when I'm with you, I don't feel like a ghost anymore." Clara's breath caught. "Sawyer." "Tell me to stop," he said roughly. "Tell me this is wrong, that you're a proper widow who doesn't need a broken man's complications." Instead, Clara rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was like lightning, electric, overwhelming, years of loneliness and need condensed into a single moment of connection. Sawyer made a sound low in his throat, pulling her against him as if she might disappear. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering as it tumbled free. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara felt as if the world had shifted on its axis. "I should apologize," Sawyer said, though his hands remained on her waist. "Don't you dare!" He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "God, Clara, do you know what you do to me? I've spent 5 years building walls, convinced I'd never... And then you arrive with your stubbornness and your gentle hands. And suddenly I'm thinking about things I'd given up on." "What things?" she asked, bold in the moonlight. "Living instead of just surviving. Mornings that aren't haunted. A reason to build something instead of just defending what's left." He rested his forehead against hers. "You." They stayed by the spring for hours, talking in ways they never had before. Clara told him about her marriage, the good and the difficult, the dreams that died with her husband, the guilt that ate at her for wanting to live again. Sawyer spoke of the complexity of existing between cultures, of loving people who society said he shouldn't, of carrying the weight of survival when so many others hadn't. As dawn approached, they rode back slowly, hands occasionally brushing as their horses walked side by side. At the ranch, Sawyer helped her dismount, holding her a moment longer than necessary. "Stay," he said simply. Clara knew he meant more than just today. The invitation hung between them, weighted with promise and complication in equal measure. "I need to think," she said honestly. "This changes everything." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I've waited 5 years. I can wait a little longer." But as Clara rode back to Cedar Falls, she wondered if either of them truly could. That afternoon, she sat in her small house, trying to compose a letter to her sister. How could she explain that she was falling in love with a man who'd lived with the Apache, who was wanted by the army, who carried more scars than she could count and spoke in nightmares she was only beginning to understand? The words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself sketching Sawyer's hands as they gentled a horse, the way moonlight caught in his gray eyes, the rare smile that transformed his harsh features. When she realized what she was doing, she set the pencil down with shaking fingers. 3 days passed before she returned to the ranch. She found Sawyer working with a young Mustang, his movements patient and sure. He looked up as she approached, and the naked hope in his expression nearly undid her resolve to take things slowly. "Didn't think you'd come back," he said. "Neither did I," Clara admitted. "But it seems I'm drawn to complicated men and impossible situations." "Is that what this is? Impossible?" She thought of the townspeople's reaction if they knew, of the army's interest in the ghost of Rio Verde, of all the reasons this shouldn't work. "Probably," she said, then, meeting his eyes. "But I've never been one to accept impossible as final." That evening, as they prepared dinner together, a simple domesticity that felt anything but simple, Sawyer showed her more Apache cooking techniques. His hands covered hers as he demonstrated how to grind corn the traditional way, and Clara found herself leaning back against his chest, feeling safer than she had in years. "This isn't proper," she murmured, even as she relaxed into his warmth. "Nothing about my life has been proper. Clara," his breath stirred her hair, "but for the first time in years, it feels right." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd somehow become essential to her existence. "I need you to understand. I can't lose someone else. If we do this, if we choose each other, I need to know you won't disappear into the shadows again." "I've been a ghost long enough," he said, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of sage and possibility. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Clara felt the last of her reservations crumble. She was choosing a difficult path, one that would invite judgment and danger in equal measure. But looking at Sawyer, this man who'd survived between worlds, who'd lost everything and still found the courage to reach for connection again, she knew she'd already made her decision. "Tell me more about her," Clara said quietly. "About Nalin." Sawyer tensed slightly, then relaxed. "She would have liked you. She had the same strength, the same refusal to be intimidated, the same healing touch." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll never forget her. But I've learned there's a difference between honoring the dead and being buried with them." Clara took his hand, scarred fingers interlacing with hers. "We both have ghosts. Maybe that's why we understand each other," he said. "Two people who know what it means to lose everything, trying to find something worth holding on to again." As if in response to his words, a painting caught Clara's eye through the window, a charcoal sketch she hadn't noticed before, depicting an Apache woman standing by a river, her face turned toward the viewer with an expression of profound peace. "You drew that?" she asked. "One of many. It helped, in the early days, keeping her memory alive without letting it consume me." He squeezed her hand. "Would you like to see the others?" It was another invitation to go deeper into his world, to see the parts of himself he'd kept hidden, even from Rosa. Clara nodded, following him inside to a trunk she'd never seen opened. Inside were dozens of sketches, scenes of Apache life, portraits of people now gone, landscapes that existed only in memory. But at the bottom, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, was something different. A sketch of the ranch, but not as it was, as it could be. Gardens where now only dust grew. Children playing where silence reigned. A future imagined but abandoned. "When did you draw this?" Clara asked softly. "Years ago, before I understood that some dreams are too dangerous to hold." He started to rewrap it, but Clara stopped him. "What if they're not?" she said. "What if the dangerous thing is giving up on them?" Sawyer looked at her then with such raw longing that it took her breath away. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the last solid thing in a world of shadows. And in that moment, Clara knew with bone-deep certainty that she'd found her home, not in a place, but in the arms of a man who understood that sometimes the greatest courage was not in fighting or surviving, but in choosing to hope again. Clara's pen hesitated over the paper as she sat at her small desk in Cedar Falls, lamplight flickering across the half-finished letter to her sister Margaret in San Francisco. The words seemed to tangle before she could write them. How could she explain that her heart had chosen a path that defied every convention she'd been raised to honor? "Dearest Margaret, I trust this letter finds you well. I write with news that will surely surprise you. These past months, I have found myself in the employment of a rancher near the Mogollon Rim, tending to various medical needs. The work is fulfilling, though the circumstances are unusual. I find myself questioning the wisdom of the choices I am making. Yet I cannot seem to choose differently. The heart, it seems, has its own compass." She set down the pen, unable to continue the half-truths. Through her window, she could see the distant mountains that sheltered Sawyer's ranch, and her resolve wavered. It had been 3 days since she'd last made the journey. 3 days of wrestling with feelings that refused to be tamed by propriety or logic. A knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Mrs. Patterson from the general store stood on her porch, her face pinched with the particular expression of someone bearing gossip disguised as concern. "Clara, dear," the older woman began without preamble, "I feel it's my Christian duty to warn you. That Quinn fellow you've been tending, people are talking. People always talk, Mrs. Patterson. This is different." The woman leaned in conspiratorially. "My husband's cousin works at Fort Thomas, says the Army's still looking for someone they call the Ghost of Rio Verde, a white man who rode with the savages, led raids against innocent settlers." Her voice dropped to a whisper. They say he took an Apache woman as his, well, that he lived as one of them. Clara kept her expression neutral despite the ice forming in her stomach. And what does this have to do with Mr. Quinn? Just seems mighty coincidental. A man living alone out there, keeping to himself, and you riding out there unchaperoned, Mrs. Patterson's meaning was clear. After the woman left, Clara paced her small parlor, mind racing. She'd known Sawyer's past would surface eventually, but hearing it spoken aloud, twisted into ugly suspicion, made the danger real in a way her heart had tried to ignore. That night, unable to sleep, she saddled her mare and rode to the ranch despite the risks. She found Sawyer sitting on the porch, rifle across his knees, as if he'd been expecting trouble. "You shouldn't be here," he said as she approached. "Mrs. Patterson came to see me." His jaw tightened. "Ah." Clara tied her horse and climbed the steps to stand before him. "Were you going to tell me the army is actively searching for you? Would it have mattered?" His eyes were tired, older than his years. "You knew what I was." "I knew who you are," Clara corrected. "There's a difference." "Not to them." She moved closer, refusing to be deterred by his defensive posture. "Then tell me the truth. All of it. Not the fragments you've been sharing, but everything. If I'm risking my reputation, my life, I deserve to know why." Sawyer was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then he stood, setting the rifle aside, and gestured for her to follow. In his study, he pulled out a locked drawer she'd never seen opened, removing a bundle of papers. "The truth," he said, spreading them on the desk, "is more complicated than even the Army knows." The documents told a story of bureaucratic betrayal and tragedy. Orders signed by Colonel Marcus Pemberton for the relocation of peaceful Apache bands. Supply manifests showing food and blankets that never reached their destinations. And most damning, a report in Sawyer's own hand, warning of planned attacks on civilians. A report marked "received," but never acted upon. "I tried to work within the system," Sawyer said, his voice hollow. "Thought I could be a bridge between worlds." But Pemberton was selling army supplies, letting settlers die to justify more military action, more contracts. His hands clenched. "When I threatened to go over his head, he branded me a traitor, said I'd gone native, couldn't be trusted. The attacks you were accused of leading? I tried to warn both sides. Sometimes I succeeded, sometimes—" He touched a particular report, dated 5 years ago. "The camp where Nolan died. I sent word to the army that it was peaceful, mostly women and children. Pemberton ordered the attack anyway." Clara felt sick. "And you've been hiding ever since?" "Running," he corrected. "Until I came here. Rosa and her late husband gave me sanctuary. Asked no questions. I thought if I disappeared completely, became the ghost they named me, maybe the killing would stop. But it hasn't. No. And now I've put you at risk too." He turned to face her fully, and Clara saw the depth of his self-loathing. "You should leave. Tonight, don't come back." Instead of responding, Clara moved around the desk to stand before him. She reached up, framing his face with her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Do you remember what you told me that night by the spring? That I made you want to remember instead of forget?" He nodded mutely. "Well, you've done the same for me. You've made me want to live again, not just exist." Her thumbs traced the weathered lines beside his eyes. "I won't let fear drive me away from that. Clara," she silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her certainty into the contact. When she pulled back, they were both breathless. "I choose this," she said firmly. "I choose you. Whatever comes." Something broke in his expression, the last wall crumbling. He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair, his body shaking with suppressed emotion. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "That's not your decision to make." They moved together then, drawn by a force stronger than caution. Sawyer's hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering as he kissed her with desperate hunger. Clara responded in kind, her proper widow's weeds suddenly feeling like chains she needed to shed. He lifted her onto the desk, documents crumpling beneath them, the past literally crushed under the weight of their present need. Clara gasped as his lips found her throat, her hands working at the buttons of his shirt, needing to touch the scars she'd tended, to reclaim them from violence with gentleness. "Clara," he groaned against her skin. "If we don't stop, then don't stop," she breathed, surprising herself with her boldness. He pulled back to search her face. "Are you certain?" In answer, she drew him back to her, and the last pretense of propriety shattered. Later, they lay entwined on the thick rug before the fireplace, a blanket hastily pulled over their cooling skin. Clara traced the scars on Sawyer's chest, marveling at how different they looked now, not just marks of pain, but a map of survival that had led him to her. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "I don't know." His arms tightened around her. "I only know I can't go back to being a ghost. Not after this. Then we face whatever comes. Together." He was quiet for a moment, then spoke with difficulty. "There's something else you should know. Pemberton. He's been promoted. He's now at Fort Thomas, less than a day's ride from here." Clara's blood chilled. "Does he know where you are?" "Not yet, but Mrs. Patterson's gossip will travel. It always does." He sat up, pulling her with him. "Clara, I need you to understand. If they come for me, I won't fight. I won't risk you or Rosa getting caught in crossfire. You'd let them take you, after everything they've done, to keep you safe." "Yes." The simple certainty in his voice broke her heart. She kissed him again, fierce and possessive. "Then we'll have to make sure it doesn't come to that." As dawn broke, they dressed in silence, both aware that something fundamental had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by a connection that felt as essential as breathing. "I should go," Clara said reluctantly. "If I'm not seen in town, it will only fuel more gossip." Sawyer caught her at the door, pulling her back for one more kiss. "Be careful. And Clara, if anything seems wrong, if anyone asks too many questions, I'll be fine." She touched his face. "We'll be fine." But as she rode away, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their time of quiet refuge was ending. The past had a way of catching up, no matter how far or fast you ran. And somewhere out there, Colonel Pemberton was still playing his deadly games, unaware that his ghost had found a reason to stop running. At home, she finished her letter to Margaret with steady hands. "The heart, it seems, has its own compass, and mine points toward a future I never expected. I am choosing love. Margaret, with all its complications and dangers, I can only hope you'll understand, even if you cannot approve. Your sister, Clara." As she sealed the envelope, Clara made a silent promise. Whatever storms were coming, she would not let Sawyer face them alone. The ghost of Rio Verde had found his anchor, and she would not let him drift back into the shadows. Not while she had breath in her body and love in her heart. The thunder of hooves shattered the morning quiet as 6 cavalry soldiers rode into the ranch yard, their blue uniforms dark with trail dust. Clara's hands stilled on the herbs she'd been sorting, ice flooding her veins as she recognized the lead rider, Sergeant Mills, a man she'd treated at Fort Apache years ago. Sawyer emerged from the barn slowly, deliberately, his hands visible but near his gun belt. Rosa appeared on the porch, wringing her hands. "Mr. Quinn!" Sergeant Mills called out, his voice carefully neutral. "We're here on behalf of Colonel Pemberton. He'd like to ask you some questions about certain incidents from 5 years past." "Since when does Pemberton ask?" Sawyer's voice was steady as granite. "Last I knew, he preferred giving orders to dead men." Mills shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Some of the younger soldiers exchanged glances. Even they had heard whispers about the ghost of Rio Verde. "Sir, I have my orders. You can come peacefully, or—" He didn't finish the threat. Clara stepped forward before she could think better of it. "Sergeant Mills, surely this can be handled without Mrs. Hallowell?" Mills's eyes widened in recognition. "What are you doing here?" "Tending to Mr. Quinn's medical needs. she said crisply. He's been recovering from injuries sustained while working his ranch. Hardly the occupation of the dangerous fugitive you seem to be seeking. Nevertheless, ma'am, we have our orders. Sawyer moved then, stepping away from any cover, his movements careful and non-threatening. I'll come. Sergeant, no need for anyone to get hurt. No! Clara moved to his side, her hand finding his arm. You said Pemberton wants him dead. This isn't an arrest, it's an execution. Mills looked even more uncomfortable. Ma'am, Tell me I'm wrong. Sergeant, look me in the eye and tell me Colonel Pemberton intends for Sawyer Quinn to receive a fair trial. The sergeant's silence spoke volumes. There must be evidence. Clara pressed on, her mind racing. Something beyond the colonel's word. The army requires documentation, witnesses. The colonel has witnesses. Ma'am, Apache prisoners who've testified to Quinn's involvement in raids. Sawyer laughed bitterly. Prisoners who'll say whatever keeps them from the noose. How convenient for Pemberton. What about counter-evidence? Clara demanded. Mister, Quinn has documents. Proof of... Clara, no. Sawyer's hand covered hers, squeezing gently. It's done. But Clara wasn't finished. She thought of the papers in Sawyer's study, the careful documentation of Pemberton's crimes. Sergeant Mills, what if I told you there was evidence that Colonel Pemberton has been selling army supplies, that he's been orchestrating attacks to line his own pockets? The soldiers stirred uneasily. Mills's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation, ma'am, and I have serious proof. She met the sergeant's eyes steadily. Papers, signed orders, supply manifests, evidence that the ghost of Rio Verde was trying to prevent massacres, not cause them. Clara, Sawyer warned, but she ignored him. Give us 3 days, she said. 3 days to gather the evidence and present it properly. If Mr. Quinn runs, you know where to find me. I'll stand as surety for his word. Mills looked torn. He was a good soldier, Clara remembered, but also a thinking man. Ma'am, I can't... You treated my husband with respect when he was dying, Clara said quietly. You sat with him during his final night when I couldn't bear it anymore. I'm asking you to remember that compassion now. The sergeant was quiet for a long moment, his men waiting for orders. Finally, he spoke. We'll be making camp at Bitter Creek, 3 days, Mrs. Hallowell. If Quinn isn't there by sunset on the 3rd day, we'll come back, and it won't be just 6 of us. As the soldiers rode away, Sawyer rounded on Clara. What have you done? Given us a chance. Given Pemberton time to prepare. He stalked toward the house, fury radiating from every line of his body. Do you think he'll just let his crimes be exposed? He's killed for far less... Clara followed him inside, where he was already pulling documents from their hiding places. Then we'd better work quickly. He spun to face her. There is no we in this. Clara, you're leaving. Today. Take Rosa and get as far from here as possible. I'm not going anywhere. Damn it, woman! He slammed his fist on the desk, making her jump. Don't you understand? Pemberton won't just kill me. He'll eliminate anyone who knows the truth. You've just painted a target on your back. Then I'm in excellent company. Clara shot back. Or did you think I'd let you face this alone? I won't have your blood on my hands. His voice cracked. I can't lose another. I can't lose you. Clara moved to him then, seeing past the anger to the fear beneath. And I can't lose you, not when we've just found each other. He caught her shoulders, his grip almost painful. Clara, please, if you've ever loved me, leave. Let me know you're safe. If I've ever loved you? She reached up to touch his face. Sawyer Quinn, I love you enough to fight for you, to stand with you. That's what love does. It stays. Something broke in his expression. He pulled her against him, holding her as if he could somehow shield her from what was coming. Stubborn woman, he murmured into her hair. Stubborn man. She countered. Now, let's organize these documents. We have work to do. They spent the day preparing, sorting papers, writing explanatory notes. creating multiple copies of the most damning evidence. Rosa helped, her usual quiet demeanor replaced by grim determination. As night fell, Sawyer made one last attempt. "There's a stage leaving Cedar Falls at dawn. You could be in Tucson by—" "I'm not leaving." Clara didn't look up from the letter she was writing to the territorial governor. "Accept it." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd given up. "Then, I need you to understand something. If Pemberton comes here himself, if things go badly, I won't let them take me alive." Clara's hand stilled. "Sawyer, I've seen what he does to prisoners who know too much. What he did to the Apache who wouldn't play his games." His voice was steady, matter of fact. "I won't give him that satisfaction." She set down her pen and went to him, taking his hands in hers. They were shaking. She realized this strong, dangerous man was trembling. "It won't come to that," she said firmly. "We're going to expose him, clear your name, and live a long, boring life raising horses and scandalizing the neighbors. Promise?" The word was barely a whisper. "Promise." That night, they made love with a desperate tenderness, each touch a vow, each kiss a prayer. Afterward, Clara lay awake listening to Sawyer's breathing, memorizing the sound, the weight of his arm across her waist, the way moonlight caught in his dark hair. "Can't sleep," he murmured. "Just thinking. Dangerous habit." He pulled her closer. "What about that sketch you showed me? The one of the ranch as it could be?" He was quiet for a moment. "What about it? I want to see it happen. Gardens and children and a future neither of us thought we'd have." She turned in his arms to face him. "I want to plant roses by the porch and teach you to waltz and grow old arguing about whose turn it is to feed the chickens." "Clara," his voice was thick with emotion, "I want a life, Sawyer, a real life, with you." He kissed her then, deep and slow, as if he could somehow make the moment last forever. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "When this is over," he said, "I'll build you a garden that'll make Eden jealous. I'll hold you to that." Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the knowledge that time was running short. As Clara packed the documents into saddlebags, a distant dust cloud caught her eye. Riders, coming fast. "Sawyer!" she called, but he was already moving, checking weapons, positioning himself with clear sight lines. But it wasn't soldiers who rode into the yard. It was a single Apache warrior, his paint horse lathered with sweat. Sawyer lowered his rifle, his whole body going still. "Kuruk," he breathed. The warrior dismounted, his dark eyes taking in the scene. Clara, the ranch, Sawyer standing there like he'd seen a ghost. "Brother," Kuruk said in accented English, "I bring warning. The colonel comes with many soldiers. He says he will burn the ghost from his hiding place." His gaze shifted to Clara. "He knows of the woman." Clara's blood chilled. Pemberton wasn't waiting 3 days. He was coming to end this on his terms. "When?" Sawyer asked. "Before the sun is high. Maybe 20 men." Kuruk stepped closer. "The people remember. Ghostwalker. Remember who tried to help? We will not let you stand alone." "No." Sawyer shook his head. "This isn't your fight anymore." "Oh, you are still my brother. Your fight is mine." Kuruk smiled grimly. "Besides, we have our own debts to settle with Pemberton." As the Apache warrior outlined his plan, Clara felt hope kindle in her chest. They might be outnumbered, but they weren't alone. The ghost of Rio Verde had friends in unexpected places, and Colonel Pemberton was about to learn that some ghosts refused to stay buried. The sun climbed higher, and in the distance, another dust cloud appeared. Larger, closer. The reckoning was coming. A month had passed since Colonel Pemberton's arrest. The ranch felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the very air had been cleansed of old ghosts. Clara sat at her small desk in Cedar Falls, penning another letter to the territorial governor's office, adding her testimony to the mounting evidence against Pemberton. The knock at her door came at sunset, urgent and demanding. Her heart leaped, even now. Unexpected visitors made her reach for the derringer she'd taken to carrying. But when she opened the door, It was young Tommy Morrison from the telegraph office, his face flushed from running. Mrs. Hallowell. Urgent message from Fort Thomas. He thrust the paper at her, already backing away. Said you'd want it immediate like. Clara's hands trembled as she read. Pemberton escaped. Stop 2 guards. Dead. Stop believed heading your direction. Stop take precautions. Stop. Sergeant Mills. She was saddling her mare within minutes. Medical bag hastily packed, rifle secured to the saddle. The ride to Sawyer's ranch had never seemed longer. Every shadow a potential threat, every sound a possible pursuer. She found the ranch too quiet. No lamplight in the windows, no smoke from the chimney. Her blood chilled as she dismounted, drawing the rifle. Sawyer, she called softly. Rosa? Movement in the barn caught her eye. She approached carefully, rifle raised, only to nearly sob with relief when Sawyer emerged from the shadows. Clara? What are you? He saw her expression and immediately pulled her into the barn. What's happened? Pemberton escaped. He killed 2 guards. She pressed the telegram into his hands. He's coming. Sawyer's face went grim. When? The message came an hour ago. He could be here now, a voice said from the barn entrance. They spun to find Colonel Marcus Pemberton standing there, pistol drawn but not quite aimed. He looked haggard, his uniform torn and dirty, but his eyes burned with fanatic hatred. The famous ghost of Rio Verde, Pemberton said, his voice cultured despite everything. And his whore. How fitting to find you together. Where's Rosa? Sawyer demanded, shifting slightly to put himself between Clara and the gun. The Mexican woman sent her to town this morning on an errand. Didn't want witnesses. Pemberton smiled coldly. Just us now. The way it should be. It's over, Pemberton, Clara said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. The whole territory knows what you've done. Killing us won't change that. Perhaps not, but it will be satisfying. His gaze fixed on Sawyer. Do you know what you cost me? Years of careful planning, a fortune in contracts, my commission, all because you couldn't mind your place. My place? Sawyer laughed bitterly. You mean watching while you slaughtered innocents? Staying quiet while you sold supplies meant for starving people? Savages. Pemberton spat. They were savages. And you chose them over your own kind. Took one as your squaw. Lived as one of them. I chose humanity over profit. Sawyer said quietly. Something you never understood. Humanity. Pemberton's laugh was ugly. Where was humanity when they butchered settlers? When they tortured soldiers? Where was it when you ordered the attack on a peaceful camp? Sawyer countered. When you killed women and children who'd already surrendered? Clara felt Sawyer tense beside her, saw his hand inch toward his holstered gun. She knew he was calculating distances, angles, chances, but Pemberton was too far away, his gun already drawn. Tell me, Pemberton said conversationally, did you ever tell your new woman how your savage bride died? How she begged? Sawyer went very still. You weren't there? No, but Lieutenant Morrison was, before his unfortunate death last week. Loose tongues are so dangerous. He told me everything. Pemberton's smile was vicious. How she tried to shield the children. How she called your name at the end. Clara felt Sawyer's control snap. He moved, lightning fast, but Pemberton was ready. The gun boomed in the enclosed space. Sawyer spun, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. No! Clara started forward, but Pemberton swung the gun toward her. Stay right there, Mrs. Hallowell. We're not done yet. Clara knelt beside Sawyer, pressing her hands over his wound. The bullet had caught him high in the shoulder, painful but not immediately fatal if she could stop the bleeding. Let me help him, she pleaded. Help? Pemberton laughed. Like you helped by spreading lies about me? By turning that fool Mills against me? He cocked the gun. No, I think you've helped enough. But his monologue had given Clara time. Her hand found the derringer in her skirt pocket, the small gun Sawyer had insisted she carry. In one fluid motion, born of desperation and love, she drew and fired. Pemberton staggered, looking down in shock at the spreading red stain on his chest. His gun wavered, discharged harmlessly into the barn wall. then fell from nerveless fingers. "You," he gasped, dropping to his knees. "You shot me." Clara kept the derringer trained on him, her hands remarkably steady. "Yes." Pemberton toppled forward and lay still. For a moment, the only sound was their harsh breathing. Then Sawyer groaned, bringing Clara's attention back to him. "Let me see," she said, her nurse's training taking over. She tore his shirt, examining the wound. "Clean through. You're lucky." "Lucky," he repeated, his voice strained. "That's one word for it." His good hand caught hers. "Clara, you saved your life," she finished. "Now hush and let me work." But his eyes were on Pemberton's still form. "Is he—" Clara didn't need to check. The placement of her shot, the amount of blood, she'd seen enough death to know. "Yes, you killed for me." There was wonder in his voice, and something else, grief for her lost innocence. "I killed to protect the man I love," Clara corrected, rapping his shoulder with practiced efficiency. "And I'd do it again." Hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Clara tensed, but Sawyer relaxed slightly. "That'll be Karuk. I sent word when I got your telegram." Sure enough, the Apache warrior appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with one comprehensive glance. Behind him, Sergeant Mills and a small detachment of soldiers fanned out. "Mrs. Hallowell?" Mills dismounted, his eyes widening as he saw Pemberton's body. "What happened here?" "Colonel Pemberton attempted to murder Mr. Quinn," Clara said calmly. "I defended him." Mills studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I see. Given the colonel's recent escape and the deaths of 2 guards, that seems reasonable." He turned to his men. "Secure the scene, and someone ride for the town doctor. Mr. Quinn needs proper medical attention." As the soldiers dealt with Pemberton's body, Mills approached Clara. "That was a brave thing you did." "It was a necessary thing," she corrected. "Perhaps." He looked at Sawyer, who was being helped to his feet by Karuk. "The territorial governor will want a full report, but between you and me, I don't think there'll be any charges." Too many people wanted Pemberton stopped. Later, as Sawyer rested in bed, his shoulder properly bandaged, Clara sat beside him in the lamplight. The events of the day seemed surreal, like something from a dime novel rather than real life. "You're too quiet," Sawyer said, having regrets. "No," she considered. "I shouldn't I? I took a life today, but all I feel is relief that you're alive." "Clara," he caught her hand. "What you did, what I did was choose our future over his hatred." She interrupted. "I won't apologize for that. I wasn't going to ask you to." He brought her hand to his lips. "I was going to say thank you, and that I love you, and that if you're willing to marry a broken-down former ghost with too many scars and a complicated past—" "Yes," Clara said before he could finish. "Yes, to all of it." He smiled then, that rare, transformative expression that never failed to catch her breath. "Just like that? Just like that?" She leaned down to kiss him gently. "Though I do have conditions." "Such as?" "That garden you promised me, and dancing lessons. I wasn't joking about the waltz, and at least a dozen children to scandalize the neighbors." "A dozen?" He laughed, then winced as it jarred his shoulder. "Ambitious woman. You have no idea." Rosa appeared in the doorway, tears of relief streaming down her face as she saw Sawyer awake and talking. "Gracias a Dios," she murmured. "I came as soon as I heard. Rosa, we're getting married," Sawyer announced. The older woman's face broke into a brilliant smile. "About time. I'll start cooking. We'll need food for the guests." "What guests?" Clara asked. "Everyone," Rosa said simply. "The whole territory will want to celebrate. The ghost of Rio Verde is finally free." As Rosa bustled away, Sawyer pulled Clara down beside him on the bed, careful of his shoulder. "Free," he repeated softly. I'd forgotten what that felt like. "Get used to it," Clara said, settling carefully against his good side. No more running, no more hiding, just living. Together, together, she agreed. Outside, the desert night was peaceful. Stars brilliant in the clear sky. Inside, two hearts beat in rhythm, finally at peace. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, and tomorrow was bright with possibility. The streets of Cedar Falls buzzed with whispers as Clara and Sawyer rode in together, her hand resting possessively on his arm. 3 weeks had passed since Pemberton's death. 3 weeks during which the territorial newspapers had been full of revelations about the late colonel's crimes. The ghost of Rio Verde had transformed from feared outlaw to vindicated hero, at least in the official record. But official records and public opinion were two very different things. Mrs. Patterson stood outside the general store. Her coterie of gossips gathered around her like hens. Their conversation ceased abruptly as the couple passed, replaced by pointed stares and not quite whispered comments. Brazen, Clara heard someone mutter, "Living in sin out at that ranch." Sawyer's jaw tightened, but Clara squeezed his arm. "Let them talk," she murmured. "We have business to attend to." Their first stop was the law office of Samuel Hartley, the attorney who'd helped present evidence against Pemberton. The elderly man greeted them warmly, ushering them into his private office. "Mr. Quinn, Mrs. Hallowell, I have excellent news." He spread papers across his desk. "The territorial governor has issued a full pardon. All charges dropped. Your record cleared. You're a free man in every sense." Sawyer stared at the documents as if they might disappear. "After all these years, justice delayed, but not denied," Hartley said kindly. Then, clearing his throat, "There is one more matter. Several Apache leaders have petitioned for you to be recognized officially for your efforts to prevent violence. They've given testimony about your character." He handed over another document. Clara read over Sawyer's shoulder, her throat tightening at the words. "Ghost walker, who walked between worlds with honor, who spoke truth when lies would have been easier, who chose justice over safety." "Karuk," Sawyer said softly. "He organized this." "Indeed. You have friends, Mr. Quinn, more than you might realize." Hartley smiled. "Now, I believe you mentioned wanting to discuss a marriage license." As they left the law office, properly licensed to wed, they nearly collided with Reverend Thompson from the Methodist Church. The man's face flushed red as he looked between them. "Mr. Quinn," he said stiffly. "Mrs. Hallowell." "Reverend," Clara replied pleasantly. "We were hoping to speak with you about performing a wedding ceremony." The Reverend's face grew redder. That is, given the circumstances, the irregular nature of your association." "You mean because Sawyer lived with the Apache?" Clara's voice remained sweet, but her eyes were steel. "Or because I'm a widow who chose love over an empty bed?" "Mrs. Hallowell," the Reverend sputtered. "Such language, and in public. What's truly scandalous, Reverend, is turning away two people who want to consecrate their love before God." Clara stepped closer. "Tell me, doesn't the Bible speak of redemption? Of not judging lest we be judged?" A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Among them, Clara spotted several patients she'd treated, families she'd helped. Young Tom Mackenzie, whose fever she'd broken last winter. Mrs. Garcia, whose difficult birth she'd attended. Old Pete Sullivan, whose infected wound she'd cleaned and dressed. It was Pete who spoke first. "Seems to me," he said loudly, "that Mrs. Hallowell has done more Christian charity in this town than most. And if she says this man's worthy of her, that's good enough for me. Here, Mrs. Garcia added. She saved my baby's life. You remember that, Reverend? When you were praying over us, it was her hands that did the work." More voices joined in. Testimonies of Clara's kindness, her skill, her compassion, and gradually, stories about Sawyer emerged too. How he'd helped a stranded family fix their wagon. How he'd shared meat from his hunting with struggling homesteaders. How he'd used his tracking skills to find a lost child. The Reverend looked increasingly uncomfortable as the crowd's mood shifted. Finally, Mrs. Eliza Martinez, the mayor's wife, stepped forward. "Reverend Thompson," she said in her cultured voice, "I believe we should remember that our Lord associated with all manner of people. Tax collectors, foreigners, those whom society cast aside. Perhaps we should follow his example?" The Reverend capitulated. Yes, of course. Saturday afternoon, shall we say 3:00? But Clara shook her head. "Thank you, Reverend, but no. A marriage blessed under compulsion is no blessing at all." She looked at Sawyer, who nodded. "We'll find another way." As they walked away, the crowd parting respectfully before them, Sawyer leaned close. "That was either very brave or very foolish." "Both," Clara admitted. "But I won't have our wedding tainted by reluctance and judgment." They were passing the small Catholic mission when a voice called out, "Senor Quinn! Senora!" Father Miguel, the elderly priest who ministered to the Mexican and Indian communities, approached with a warm smile. "I heard what happened with Reverend Thompson. Most unfortunate." "It's all right, Father," Clara said. "We'll manage." "Perhaps I might offer an alternative?" His eyes twinkled. "I have been known to perform marriages for those whom others turn away. After all, God's love knows no boundaries of race or past mistakes." Sawyer studied the priest. "You'd marry us, knowing what I am?" "I know you are a man who protected innocence at great personal cost." Father Miguel replied, "I know you loved a woman of a different people and honored her memory. I know you have found love again with a woman of great courage. What else need I know?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Father, we would be honored." "Saturday, then?" "Not at 3. Let the Reverend have his empty church. Come at sunset. God seems closer then, don't you think?" As they made their remaining errands, supplies, fabric for Clara's dress, arrangements for their small reception, the town's mood seemed to shift. Where before there had been cold silence, now there were nods of acknowledgement, even a few smiles. At the seamstress shop, Mrs. Chen, who rarely spoke to anyone, pressed a length of beautiful silk into Clara's hands. "For happiness," she said simply. "You understand being outsider. It's good to see outsiders find joy." That evening, back at the ranch, Clara and Sawyer sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains crimson and gold. Rosa hummed in the kitchen, preparing for the celebration to come. "Regrets?" Sawyer asked, as had become his habit. "Never," Clara replied, as had become hers. "Though I do wonder what my sister will say when she receives my letter. Probably that you've lost your mind. Marrying a former outlaw who lived with Apaches and speaks to horses better than people." Clara laughed. "Lucky for you. I lost my mind the moment I walked into that barn and found you pointing a gun at me. Lucky indeed." He pulled her closer. "Clara, what you did today, standing up to the Reverend, the whole town, was nothing compared to what you've endured." She turned to face him. "But I want you to know, I'll do it every day if I have to. I'll face down every gossip, every judge, every narrow mind in the territory if it means we can build our life together." "Our life," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." "Good, because I have plans. That garden we discussed? I'm thinking roses by the porch, vegetables out back. And we'll need to expand the house. Rosa can't sleep in that tiny room forever. And eventually, when those dozen children arrive..." Sawyer silenced her with a kiss, deep and thorough. When they broke apart, both breathless, he was smiling. "One thing at a time, woman. Let's start with the wedding." "Agreed. But I'm holding you to those dozen children. Clara Hallowell, you'll be the death of me." "Clara Quinn," she corrected. "Or will be, come Saturday. And I plan to keep you alive for a very long time. Mr. Quinn." Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. The small Catholic mission was transformed with candles and desert blooms. Rosa's handiwork evident in every detail. The witnesses were few but meaningful. Rosa, of course, tears already streaming. Karuk, standing proud in a mixture of Apache and Mexican formal wear. Sergeant Mills, off-duty and smiling. The Martinez family, who defied social convention to attend. A handful of Clara's former patients. And, surprisingly, Mrs. Patterson herself, clutching a handkerchief and trying to look disapproving while clearly fighting tears. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by Mrs. Chen's skilled hands and adorned with Apache beadwork, a gift from Karuk's sister. Sawyer stood at the altar in a new suit, looking uncomfortable but undeniably handsome, his eyes never leaving Clara as Rosa escorted her down the aisle. Father Miguel performed the ceremony in English, Spanish, and even a few words of Apache that Karuk had taught him. When he asked if anyone objected, the silence was profound. Not the silence of disapproval, but of witnesses to something sacred. "I do," Clara said when prompted, her voice clear and certain. "I do," Sawyer echoed, his voice rough with emotion. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Father Miguel smiled. "You may kiss your bride, Señor Quinn." The kiss was tender, a promise and a seal, and the small gathering erupted in celebration. As they turned to face their witnesses as husband and wife, Clara caught Sawyer wiping his eyes. "Tears, Mr. Quinn," she teased gently. "Happy ones, Mrs. Quinn." He brought her hand to his lips. "The happiest." The reception in the mission courtyard was simple but joyful. Mexican guitars played, Rosa's feast was devoured, and even Mrs. Patterson was seen dancing with Sergeant Mills. As the evening wound down, Karuk approached the newlyweds. "Ghost Walker," he said formally, then smiled. "Brother, the people wish you to have this." He presented a beautiful woven blanket, the kind given to new couples in Apache tradition. "For your lodge, may it shelter your love through all seasons." Sawyer accepted it with visible emotion. Responding in Apache, Karuk clasped his shoulder, nodded to Clara with respect, and melted back into the night. As the last guests departed and the candles burned low, Clara and Sawyer stood in the mission doorway, looking out at the star-filled sky. "No more ghosts," Clara said softly. "No more ghosts." Sawyer agreed. Just us, she repeated, and liked the sound of it. They rode home to the ranch under a canopy of stars, the future spreading before them like an unwritten page. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, not as a ghost and a widow, but as husband and wife, partners in the great adventure of living fully, loving deeply and finely, truly, being free. Cedar Falls, Arizona Territory. 1 year later, autumn 1883. My dearest Margaret, your letter arrived yesterday, bringing news of San Francisco's busy streets and society gatherings. How different your world seems from mine here in the high desert, where the mountains stand eternal and the sky stretches endlessly blue. You asked about our life, whether I regret my choices. Sister, I write to you from the porch Sawyer built with his own hands, looking out at gardens that would indeed make Eden jealous. The roses have taken root beautifully, red climbers that frame our door like a blessing. Behind the house, our vegetable garden thrives under Rosa's careful tending. She claims it's the soil, but I know it's love that makes things grow here. The ranch has transformed. What was once a fortress against the world has become a haven for it. We've added 2 rooms to the house. One serves as my clinic, where I treat neighbors who ride from miles around. The other waits quietly, hopefully, for the children we pray will come. Sawyer built a schoolhouse last month, small but sturdy, for the scattered family's children. He teaches them tracking and horse care alongside their letters, bridging worlds as he always has. The man himself has changed too. The shadows that once haunted his eyes have lifted, replaced by a peace I never thought to see. He still wakes sometimes, reaching for ghosts, But now I'm there to remind him he's home. He's teaching me Apache ways, their medicine, their understanding of the land. In return, I've taught him to waltz, though he claims my toes may never recover. Last week, we hosted a gathering that would have astonished the old Cedar Falls gossips. Karuk and his family came, along with several Mexican ranching families, the cavalry squadron from Fort Thomas, yes, even those who once hunted him, and half the town. We roasted a whole steer, and the music lasted until dawn. Apache drums, Mexican guitars, and Mrs. O'Brien's fiddle creating a harmony I've never heard elsewhere. Sawyer has been recognized by the territorial government as a cultural liaison, helping prevent conflicts between settlers and the Apache bands. It's dangerous sometimes. Old hatreds die hard, but necessary work. He translates not just words but worlds, helping each side see the humanity in the other. I've never been prouder to stand beside anyone. You worry about my safety. I know. But Margaret, I've never felt safer than in the arms of a man who understands that true strength lies not in violence, but in the courage to build bridges where others would burn them. We've had our trials. There are still those who mutter about the ghost of Rio Verde, who cross themselves when we pass, but they grow fewer as our life speaks louder than old stories. The sketch Sawyer once drew of what the ranch could be now hangs in our parlor, and slowly, steadily, we're making it real. The Lonesome Ranch has become a crossroads of cultures, a place where Apache, Mexican, and Anglo children play together while their parents share meals and stories. It's not always easy. Prejudice runs deep. But with each passing season, the roots of understanding grow stronger. At night, we sit by the fire, and Sawyer tells me stories of his two worlds. I share memories of our childhood, of Papa's laugh and Mama's garden. We're weaving our separate pasts into a shared future, thread by careful thread. Sometimes I remember the woman who first rode to this ranch, bitter with loss and convinced her heart had died with her husband. I'm grateful to her for her courage, but I hardly recognize her now. Love, real love, doesn't diminish what came before. It honors it while creating space for what comes after. My first husband gave me strength. Sawyer gave me the reason to use it. Rosa says I glow these days, says the desert has claimed me for its own. Perhaps she's right. I've learned to read the sky for weather, to identify healing plants by scent, to understand the language of this vast, beautiful land. But more than that, I've learned that home isn't a place but a choice, the daily choice to build something beautiful with another person. Despite all the reasons the world says you shouldn't, the charcoal portrait of Nalin still hangs in Sawyer's study. I insisted on it. She's part of our story, the woman who first saw past the surface to the man beneath. Sometimes I catch him looking at it, and I see not pain, but gratitude. We've learned that hearts are vast territories, with room for many loves, many lives, many possibilities. As I write this, Sawyer is working with the horses, his voice carrying on the wind as he speaks to them in that gentle way of his. Soon, he'll come in for lunch, dusty and smiling, and we'll share our simple meal while planning the addition of a barn for the ranch's growing horse breeding program. Tonight, perhaps we'll ride to the sacred spring, or perhaps we'll simply sit together, watching the stars emerge like promises in the darkening sky. This is my life now. Margaret, not the one I planned, not the one society would have chosen for me, but the one I've claimed with both hands and whole heart. It's a life built on the ashes of old pain, watered with tears and tenderness, growing wild and strong and free. I hope someday you'll visit, that you'll see for yourself how beautiful a life can be when it's lived without apology, without hiding, without fear. Until then, know that your sister is happy, truly, deeply, radiantly happy, here in the high desert with her once ghost, building tomorrow from the scattered pieces of yesterday. The sun is setting now, painting our mountains in shades of copper and gold. Sawyer is walking up from the corral, and his face lights up when he sees me on the porch, the same wonder every day, as if he still can't believe I'm real. I'm here, I'm his. The feeling is mutual. Give my love to the family. Tell them Clara Hallowell Quinn sends her greetings from a place where Apache roses bloom beside pioneer dreams, where love speaks in many languages, and where every sunset promises a new dawn. Your devoted sister, Clara Pease. Rosa insists I tell you she's teaching me to make proper tortillas. She says no Apache Anglo household is complete without them. I suspect she's right about most things. As Clara set down her pen, Sawyer's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as he read the last lines. Apache roses and pioneer dreams, he murmured, amused. Too fanciful. Perfect. He turned her to face him, his gray eyes warm as summer storms. Like you. She kissed him then, there on the porch they'd built together, as the desert evening wrapped around them like a benediction. Inside, Rosa was humming in the kitchen, preparing their evening meal. Beyond the garden, the land stretched endless and full of promise. The ghost of Rio Verde was just a memory now, a story told around campfires. In his place stood Sawyer Quinn, husband, rancher, bridge between worlds. And beside him, no longer the grieving widow, but Clara Quinn, healer, wife, testament to the truth that love could indeed conquer all. The stars emerged one by one, ancient witnesses to their small human happiness. And in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound no longer lonely but full of wild joy. The same joy that filled the lamplit windows of a ranch that had become a home, where two hearts had found their way through darkness into light, and where every dawn brought new reasons to be grateful for the courage to choose love over fear. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from? Let us know in the comments below so we can connect with fellow listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, adventure, and redemption from the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Clara and Sawyer's journey. We'd love to hear what touched your heart in their story.